Well, last week, as we continue our study of Matthew, probably the greatest thing we learned was that Jesus has authority on earth to forgive sins. As we dive right back in here in Matthew, as we see Jesus is continually showing himself as God. And we're starting out right after he had told them that he came for sinners and not the righteous. So we start in verse 14. Then John's disciples came to him saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" Jesus said to them, "Can wedding guests be sad while the groom is with them? The time will come when the groom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast. No one patches an old garment with an unshrunk cloth, because the patch pulls away from the garment and makes the tear worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the skins burst, the wine spill out, and the skins are ruined. No, they put new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved." Now, before we go on, the thing we need to realize here is this is John's disciples. They're asking Jesus a sincere question. Usually when the Pharisees approach, they're trying to trip Jesus up, trying to make him say something wrong. Well, these are John the Baptist's disciples. And John and his disciples, they started preaching that, hey, Jesus is fixing to be here. So, what this really means and what we get at, say, fasting, Old Testament fasting, it's always a mournful experience. When you would fast and pray, you would be, basically the Old Testament, they're mourning and looking towards redemption and a Redeemer being sent to us. So it was not a very happy time. So when John the Baptist and his disciples started, it would make sense that they would continue fasting in that mournful, sad time because they were waiting on redemption to come. And it was commonplace, in Hosea, God says in the Old Testament that God pursues Israel like a groom, that his people are his bride. And so the Old Testament, these Jews would have known that, as we're fasting, we're waiting on a wedding day. So Jesus is telling them, like, hey, I'm the groom. I'm here now. The mournful sadness, praying for redemption to come, that's over with. Here I am. He goes on to say, now there'll be a time for them to fast when I have to head out for a little while. And basically, the reason he uses these unshrunk cloth and the wineskin analogies here, God was doing something new with the coming of Jesus. And it's not just a revision or an update of the Jewish religious systems. Christ's coming was a transformation of everything. But we notice that it says that both are preserved. That the way we do this, he didn't come and eliminate all that. He come and finished all that. See, they were doing this mournful fasting, waiting on a Redeemer. Well, now you've got a Redeemer. So that kind of changes now. Right? So verse 18. As he was telling them these things, suddenly one of the leaders came and knelt down before him, saying, "My daughter just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." So Jesus and his disciples got up and followed him. Okay, so right now they are headed to a miracle place. Hey, my daughter's dead. This guy's got enough faith, says, if you'll just come lay your hand on her, she can be healed. So him and the disciples, they're heading to their next position. So keep that in mind as we carry along. Verse 20, just then a woman who had suffered from bleeding for 12 years approached from behind and touched the hem of his robe. For she said to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be made well. Jesus turned and saw her. "Have courage, daughter," he said. "Your faith has saved you." and the woman was made well from that moment. Now, we need some background on all this particular, because a whole bunch just happened there that if you're not an Orthodox Jew, you wouldn't get. I don't think any of us are Orthodox Jews, so we'll explain it. Now, this lady, she has a specifically female bleeding issue. We'll handle some of this with kids' gloves, so use your imaginations. For 12 years, she's had this deal. Now, by Jewish law, a woman is ceremonially and socially unclean during this time. So she's not allowed to go to church, to temple. She's not allowed to meet with the priest, offer sacrifices, anything, which was the whole life of a Jew. You can't do that during this time. This lady has a continuation problem. So she has been ceremonially unclean for 12 years. So people are not going to touch her because you're defiled if you touch somebody that's unclean. So it doesn't say what age this started, but if this started before she was married, she's never been married. And if it started after she had been married, she would have been divorced. So we can pick up a whole lot of stuff that they don't necessarily tell us, because if we were Jews, we would know all that, but we need to get in the sense of how bad off this lady was, because you could pass it off as like, well, it's not bad enough to kill her. It's been 12 years, but still, she's ostracized completely. Her family can't have contact with her. And the thing about it is she would have known this, and she was going to go touch Jesus. So this was going to defile super priest guy that I think can help me up. So there's this whole section of this that makes it different. But the thing about it is what Jesus says to her is he calls her daughter. See, Jesus would have known that this lady was pretty well familyless. So what does he call her? Daughter. Because he's bringing her into his family, because he sees her faith. And you also don't ever see Jesus say anything about like, hey, what are you defiling me for? Now I got to do this, that, and the other, and ritual wash and all these crazy things. He never mentions that. He just says, daughter, have courage, daughter. Your faith has saved you. She was made well. Far too many times, we church people worry about getting our hands a little dirty dealing with folks. But Jesus didn't. And the thing about, in 2 instances in a row, as we carry on the next one, there was 2 things that they considered the most defiling. Blood issues of any kind and corpses. So we'll move on to verse 23. Remember, we're on our way to a guy's house whose daughter's dead. When Jesus came to the leader's house, he saw the flute players and a crowd lamenting loudly. Now, this is something interesting. It's common practice to hire flute players and professional mourners for funerals back then. Even the poorest people were required to hire at least 2 flute players and 1 wailing woman to perform at their services. So some of you may have some crazy kinfolks that really make a scene at funerals. They're just saving you money, really. I wish Mother was here. She would cackle out loud and call somebody by name. But anyway, so we get on to, here's all these people that are congregated. Some of them are paid to congregate around a dead girl. So this just ain't, because we'll see where Jesus said, like, well, she's just asleep. Asleep is a lot of times in the Bible refers to death. But Jesus doesn't think very highly of death, because death is not very permanent to him. So in 24, he says, leave, he said, because the girl is not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him. Okay, so the paid mourners and flute people went from doing their crying to laughing, like, I'm being paid to play flute for a dead lady. She's not asleep. Because people just don't waste money like that, right? After the crowd had been put outside, and some of the wording in this, after they had been put outside, really leads more to after they had been thrown out on their heads. They were seriously put outside. He went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. The news of this spread throughout that whole area. So, like we said before, the two things that you don't touch as a Jew that's going to the most defile you is somebody with the blood something and a corpse. So, within 3 verses, he touches a blood issue lady. Because God doesn't have to touch somebody to heal them. We see many times where he just says, okay, you're good. But I believe he purposefully, in this instance, lays his hand on this girl. Because like, this is not defiling. And she got up. And of course, the news of that spread throughout the area. At this point in the ministry, this was probably about the biggest miracle, especially widespread. The disciples had seen him calm a storm, which was pretty amazing. There was just 12 of them. But we see he did not care about her uncleanliness, only that she needed help. Also, her father had faith and knew that Jesus had authority over death, because our God tells death what to do. Verse 27 says, as Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, have mercy on us, Son of David. Now, it's not that easy for blind people to follow folks. So these blind guys are following, and they're calling out. And the sense of this word is they're hollering, hey, we need some help. So they follow him on in there. And also, Son of David, just to give some more background. See, Jesus was born, and the Old Testament knew that their Savior was going to come from the lineage of David. So when they would say Son of David, that is what's called a messianic title, meaning that's a title given to the Messiah. So they're waiting for, because obviously they didn't quite know what to call him, Son of David. So these guys saying Son of David, this is them basically saying, help us, Son of God, Messiah, Savior of the world. When you say somebody's the Son of David, you pretty much put yourself against all the Jews, because they're saying, hey, you believe this guy's God, so you're not on our team. That was a very serious thing to call somebody. But these people believed, and they followed him all the way into what we believe is Peter's house. And that gets us to verse 28. When he entered the house, the blind men approached him, and Jesus said to them, do you believe I can do this? They said to him, yes, Lord. First off, it's always funny when Jesus asks people questions, since Jesus knows everything. There's always reasons behind it. Do you believe that I can do this? You know, he's wanting people to verbalize that they can. And they said to him, yes, Lord. Again, saying, we know who you are. So then he touched their eyes, saying, once again, the Jews would have believed that a blind person got that because of some kind of sin and was certainly defiled. Once again, Jesus is touching them. He said, let it be done for you according to your faith. And their eyes were opened. And Jesus warned them sternly, be sure that no one finds out. But they went out and spread news about him through that whole area. They knew him and knew what he could do. More than likely, Jesus telling them not to tell anybody. Jesus knew about the eventual torture and hardships that his disciples would face. And most likely, he's just trying to protect these 2 poor blind guys from what these Pharisees and Sadducees were going to do if they went out saying, hey, Son of David, made my eyes better. It would probably not be too good for them, is most likely the reason. Maybe he was just using reverse psychology so that they would tell more people. Don't go tell nobody. And then we're going to go out and tell everybody. Okay, we're going to come back to that at the end. We'll go on to verse 32. Just as they were going out, a demon-possessed man who was unable to speak was brought to him. When the demon had been driven out, the man who had been mute spoke, the crowds were amazed, saying, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." Here's the fun part. But the Pharisees said, "He drives out demons by the ruler of the demons." See, the Pharisees knew and seen that the crowd saw, okay, this is a powerful dude. But they're so blind to their regimented religious way of doing things. These people knew all the prophecy and the coming stuff better than anybody. But they were so caught up with themselves they don't see it. They knew somebody was doing it, so what's the first guess? It's the devil doing it. He's just the devil trying to trick you. Verse 35, Jesus continued going around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected, like a sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." Verse 37 really sums up God's calling on me to start this church. I have given these numbers before, but they're worth repeating. The State Board of Mission, through the Census Department, whatever, they'll give you any information that you need about stuff. And as soon as I started this journey, I contacted Lamar Duke, who's the head of the church planting for the state of Alabama. He said, "I'll send you a demographic." And he did. I gave him my address then because I didn't know this place existed. But he since has given me the information from this. And it tells me about everybody that lives here. Within 5 miles of this building, there are 2,706 people. Now, us country folks like, no. Now, that's documented people. This is from the census. This does not include anybody undocumented. So there's no telling how low that number is. Now, over 1,900, close to 2,000 of them are all under the age of 50. So this is a young community. Now, I also get numbers from the Cleveland Baptist Association that has all kind of stuff. And given the fact that our churches are mostly attended by people in the 50-plus range, we are well over 90% unreached people group. Now, we're not talking about Hindus in the middle of a jungle somewhere. These are Hollis folks. It's the unreached people group. That is what God used to drive me to do this. The harvest is truly abundant. And we need to pray for workers because right now we've got a room full here and we need more because we need not rest until all 1,900 have found the joy of Jesus. Because we serve a mighty God who can do whatever he wants. And he wants all people to be saved. And he has given us the privilege of taking his word out. That's why, as we get close to the end, I want to look back at these two blind guys. Jesus told them not to tell, possibly for their own safety. But they didn't listen, and they couldn't shut up about what Jesus has done. We have been plainly told, as we get to the end of Matthew, we'll see where God told us, hey, y'all need to go out and tell everybody about me and how much I love them. And then we don't. Jesus told these people, when Jesus works in your life, these guys, whatever, they could not tell it. We all know and have heard the gospel of Jesus. It is the good news. And it is that even because our sin separates us from God, and the penalty for that is eternal death, The good news is that Jesus came and died to pay that. And because he's got authority over death, beat it for us. That is the good news, and that is the greatest news. But we've said before in other services, we all have good news of Jesus' story. Because you can bet that these blind guys, when they wouldn't stop telling about Jesus, this was before Jesus died. So they weren't telling the death, burial, resurrection story. They were telling, dude, you remember when I couldn't see? I can see. Ask me how many fingers you're holding up. You know, they were telling their good news story. And we all have a good news of Jesus story that no theologian can dispute. No atheist can dispute. That is the story that you know as true. Because I can tell you, if anybody says they know all the Bible stuff and they've got all that figured out, they are dumb as a sack of hammers and lying. Because the Bible is so full and God is so great, we'll never totally understand him. Something that I've always heard before, like, well, we'll understand everything when we get to heaven. We won't. Sadly, God for eternity is going to be so far ahead of us, we won't understand it. And if we understood all that, we'd be just as awesome as he was. And we are not that awesome. No offense to you, but we are not. But you all have a good news story. You need to tell it. Has God helped you in your marriage? Tell it. Has God helped you in your finances? Tell it. Has he helped you in your sicknesses? Tell it. Has he helped you through grief, addiction? Tell it. Depression, anger, lust. God fixes people. We need to tell it. He has fixed you. Tell somebody about it. Now, I'm not asking people to learn some big, long theological thing and, hey, I'm going to walk you through this Romans thing where we go through all this crazy stuff. Those are good things to know, but that's not what we're asking. You don't need to take that and drop some long dissertation on your coworker tomorrow. But if God has helped you with your marriage, if you will listen, God will dump somebody in your lap. Man, me and my wife's having a hard time. Ding, ding, ding. You got the answer. Tell it. That's what he wants us to do. Our story, because you can help them. And then when people see that Jesus fixes people, that draws them to himself. So as Micah begins coming, and we get ready to have this time of invitation, you know what God's done for you. Ask God to let you pour some of that help out on somebody. And I guarantee, be prepared, he will.